Hello, welcome everyone. I see we have more folks joining. We're just going to take a couple minutes to let everyone get signed on. We know that you have Zooms back to back. While we're getting started, if you could just drop in the chat your name and what office you're with. If you want, tell us where you're quarantining. I know a lot of our Hill partners have allowed their offices to work remotely. We would love to see where you are. Fantastic. I'm going to give folks 2 more minutes. We got about 56 attendees with us, and we had over 100 register. So just giving people time. Awesome. Hey, Oscar. Hey, Nicole. Oh, Julia, she's remote too like us. Welcome, welcome. Oh, Ken Bug. Hey, College to Congress partner. Chris Pappas, hello. Austin, Renee, Patricia, thank you for joining us. Welcome, welcome. So if you just logged in, we're just giving people 1 to 2 more minutes to join us before we get it started. This is going to be a really great webinar today. We actually logged in a bit early, and I was talking to our panelists just about how this is different from so many other professional development opportunities that exist out there, because we're working hand in hand with you guys, with other offices on the Hill, but also with these interns. We really can see both sides of this, and I'm excited to get to dive in with you. Fantastic. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get us kicked off. As I said, I am so excited to get to chat with you today. If you are an intern coordinator on the Hill, you're in the right place. We are going to be helping you better understand your own management style, really hone in on that. We're going to be helping you, realize how to build trust with these interns. That was already hard in and of itself. Now you're having to do it remotely. There are some practical hard skill sets you can put in place to make sure that transition is easier, and we're going to be talking about that today. We're also going to be leaving some time for Q&A, and so if there's something we kind of breezed over or didn't touch, make sure you're using the Q&A chat box. It's going to come directly to me. I'll be able to facilitate it with our panelists today. So really excited to get this kicked off. Before we get started, I want to make sure to introduce myself to you. I looked at the attendee list before we logged on. I did see we have a lot of College to Congress partner offices here. For those who already work with us, welcome. For those who are new to us, get on board. My name is Audrey Hinson, and I founded College to Congress about 5 years ago now, so that all interns, regardless of their education, the funding available, their means, their access, could come to Washington, D.C. and intern and help our country. We have changed a lot in the last 4 years. We used to help about 10 to 20 students a year, providing full scholarships to cover housing, clothes, meals, transportation, and more for a summer internship. But since then, we've grown. We provide year-long internships now. We're serving about 550 students. We're still providing clothing and housing, but we're getting to help so many more. As I mentioned, if you are new to our organization, we want to work with you. So reach out to me, reach out to someone on our team. There's a couple different ways you can get involved. One, as I mentioned, having your office sign up with us. What that looks like is we will work hand in hand, our program coordinator and you, the intern coordinator, to really understand what schools you want us to recruit students out of. We're going to train your interns. We're going to help place them in your office and help vet them. And then from there, we're going to give you some good press about it. We love sharing stories. We love getting to talk about you, your district, your boss, and your office culture. So would love to get you signed up. Another way you can get involved is you can personally get involved. One of the most rewarding things I think we do is providing mentorship to our interns. So if you're sitting at home, you're in quarantine, you're feeling lonely, if you're like me and you need that human connection, sign up to be a mentor. You can go to c2cuniversity.org and sign up. We're going to help place you with an intern or a potential intern. Hopefully you'll help them get there, who you have something in common with and who, you know, you can help groom. It's all about paying it forward. None of us got to the hill or got to where we are today on our own. So make sure that you're being a part of that solution. So with that, welcome to our webinar. I am so excited to introduce my friends, folks I get to work with so often. We're going to be talking to Marcy from PopVox. We're also going to be talking to my dear friend, Melissa, who is a female entrepreneur and a boss in and of herself, Melissa Dargan with TourTrackr. We also have Bradley with us from the Congressional Management Foundation. You guys probably see the name constantly because they're training your chief of staffs and your LDs. Brad's here to help train our intern coordinators and our junior staff who are going to be our future chiefs of staffs one day. And we have Ann Meeker here, who is also from PopVox. Just to tell you a little bit of how this is going to go, we have today broken up into 4 different segments. The first is going to be soft skills and empathy. I don't know about you guys. I follow a lot of CEOs. I read what they write. The number one quality of any CEO, and many members of Congress will tell you this too, is empathetic leadership. You don't have to wait till you're at the top to learn that. You can start learning that today, and we're going to dig into that. The second thing we're going to be covering is hard skills and remote tools. Like I said, there are some really practical tools out there that we can dig into and you can use to make your life easier. The third thing, we call it the 3 C's: communication, culture, and care. As we're all at home, we realize that work and home life is not separate anymore. So how do you nurture an environment that takes all of that into consideration? And finally, we're going to be digging a little bit into your role as a manager. I'm a big believer that if you're an intern coordinator, then you're a manager, and you need to own that, and you need to really learn how to use that to your advantage. So without further ado, I think Marcy from PopVox is going to be kicking it off with our soft skills and empathy training. So Marcy, come on board.
Thanks so much, Audrey, and thanks so much to the whole College to Congress team. We're big fans, and also recognize that today's interns are tomorrow's staffers. So the experience that they have and the management, as you pointed out, from the intern coordinators they're working with, is so important to their future, not just during the internship, but their future potentially on Capitol Hill and elsewhere. So thank you so much for bringing us all together. I am happy to talk about this topic, both because I am a former intern, but also because once I left the Hill in 2010 to start PopVox, we have, for the most part, over the past decade, maintained a remote working environment. So I kind of feel like everybody came to work in my co-work space this year, and I'm happy to have you all. But there are definitely some lessons learned, some hard won over the years that I'm happy to share. And they do kind of veer into the soft skills side of things. So on to the next slide, Brendan. One of the things that I just want to point out as we are talking about this new world is that I know at first it was hard to know if this was a temporary situation or if we actually needed to change the way that we do things to kind of hunker down and get ready for the long haul. And I think just in the perspective of how long tenures tend to be on Capitol Hill, I think the average tenure for an intern coordinator is about 2 years. And we're already 6 months into this crazy world of pandemic life. And very likely, I think, looking ahead may have several more months, if not more, of partially remote or remote work, especially for interns. So if you're wondering if this is, if you need to adjust your processes and approach in the short term or plan for some long-term adjustments, go ahead and think about it as long-term adjustments. You can always roll it back later when everybody's in person in the office, chit-chatting together again. But it is currently to your benefit to think about this as not just something for the end of the year, but into the next Congress and beyond. So on to the next. And as a part of that, I really want to emphasize, and I think Audrey touched on this, how important you are right now. And that's because for these interns, and many of you potentially were interns before your current positions, you know that the rich experience of being on Capitol Hill, learning your way around, getting lost in the hallways, interacting with people of various levels, from the members to the chiefs and others, in so many ways is not present for remote interns, and you are their experience. And so even though it's important at all times to kind of check yourself with the interaction that you're having, especially with junior staffers, it is even more important during the remote times to just take that extra breath and realize that the way that you're interacting with these interns really is their experience. One of the ways that I like to think about the mindset of being a remote manager is the need to externalize. And for many of you, this is no longer something that needs to be said because you've been living it for the past 5-6 months. But things that go unspoken in an office that you can pick up on because you're just standing next to someone and you can feel they're having a rough day, or you see that they're very busy, so maybe you shouldn't interrupt them. Those kinds of things are just not possible when you're remote. Remote teams require externalization. They require you to share and overshare, and they require you to ask for what you need. So as I mentioned, whether it's when you jump into a call, sharing the background, especially of what's going on in the office. As we all know, it is really tough to know what's going on in Congress. It's tough for people physically on the Hill to know what's going on in Congress, what's on the calendar today, what the main issue is in the office, what things your office is dealing with. And so for you, when you have that conversation with your interns, to even just give a little perspective of, hey, we're really focused on this topic, we're really worried about this, we're overwhelmed on this, our schedule's looking like, the meta perspective, and even a little gossip goes a long way to helping interns know how their work fits into the big picture. Just a few other things, again, hard one over many years, is to say what you mean. Don't assume that that kind of beating around the bush about something is going to help. Ask for what you need. Don't assume that the person on the receiving end will know. But also assume best intentions. So if you get an email or a Slack message or a Teams message, and it can be read one of two ways, read it with a smile and assume that the nice intention is what's there, and share that with your interns, because I think we all know, especially when you're the junior one, it's sometimes easy to get a bit paranoid and think, did they mean that in a nice way, or how did they mean that? And again, as a part of this strange remote environment, it's just important to help people feel okay. And then another piece is just using the right communications channel for the purpose at hand. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, and I know others will cover that. And then you're probably already doing this, but a collaborative document and brain dump goes a long way. The term making sure you're on the same page has really never been more accurate, because now in this remote environment, it's tough to know. And so sometimes just everybody viewing the same notes in a Google Doc or some other collaborative software is very important. This to me is the most important lesson of remote environments, and that is that no good comes from long emails or long email chains. And I know Capitol Hill is notorious for long, explanatory, background, CYA email chains, and it just can get out of hand. It can get out of hand because everybody's overwhelmed and it's tough to read through all that. So my recommendation on this is just put the important part first. If there's an ask, make that clear, preferably in bold. And if a back and forth is required, pick up the phone, say, hey, can we pop into a video chat? Or in some cases, take it to a collaborative software like Slack or Teams. But if you find yourself going down the road of long back and forth email chains, get out of there. And one important note that I would share is to make sure that you deliver critique or anything requiring nuance in a call or a video chat, not via email. My lesson over a decade of remote work is that you will never regret softening your tone. If you are about to send something and it could be said in a nicer way without a harsh angle, do it. You can sharpen it up later. And that is the caveat on that is, unless you're dealing with a situation that involves a violation of a policy or something that is very important to get explicitly in writing. I also think it's important to not go too long on the video calls. As Ashley mentioned, as Audrey mentioned, as we were getting started, we're all in too many video calls. So find a sweet spot on your scheduling. It's amazing how much time you can reclaim if you schedule a 20-minute call versus a 30-minute call versus an hour-long call. Get in there, cover what needs to be covered. And if you don't need to keep it going, don't wait the entire time. I know your time is really crunched, so prioritize shorter meetings. But that face-to-face video chat, you will have heard this from so many people, is so important. And again, it's being able to pick up on the clues that let you know how someone's doing. A little chit chat goes a long way. Sometimes in a meeting, we try the tagging where the one person talks and then calls on the next person. So it's not always a top-down lead of the meeting from the person who's organizing it. We can go on to the next slide. I don't want to take up too much time. But also just to emphasize the importance and the value of asynchronous channels like Slack or Teams that allow you to default to open. So what's important about this is the ability for everyone to feel like they're in the loop, even when they're not the target of the communication. And again, when you're operating remotely, it's so difficult. It's tough on the hill at any time to know what's going on in all the different areas. But if you can default to open rather than a direct message, that lets everyone know what's going on without having to call a meeting for everyone to be updated. One of the things I think that's important for these asynchronous channels is explaining how you work. So things like, hey, when you post something in Slack, it might not be seen immediately, so don't read into anything about that. We'll get to, we'll answer it when the person has time. Or if you need an immediate answer, at me, so I'll know that you need an immediate answer. Just letting people know what those posts mean, it actually helps with some of the anxiety that comes from, should I post or should I not post? But don't be afraid to have some fun, to use the emojis, to share the GIFs, to share some stories and links. And one of the things that I have found, and again, this is over many years, is just reaching out to someone and saying, hey, how's it going? Instead of, when is that thing going to be ready? Sometimes it's okay to just ask people how they're doing, and then you'll hear, well, actually, I just tried to do this thing and I wasn't able to find the document. So it's okay to just check in and see how things are going. But again, ask for what you need when you need it. And we can go to the next one. And this is my obsession, the CC, which I think can either be a tool or a weapon. I want you to think about the CC as a wonderful way to keep people informed if you clarify that if you're in the CC field, your action is not required, your response is not required, it is just an FYI. Certainly from senior staff, CCing folks in a more junior position, that sends a message of, I'm keeping you in the loop. This is something you might find interesting. We may discuss this later. The opposite is not true. A junior staffer CCing up in many cases is, I'm telling on you, I'm escalating, and it just sends a very different vibe. So I think as you're interacting with interns, I consider that CC as a getting in the loop opportunity. So to sum all of this up, you are the vehicle now for these interns' experience with Capitol Hill. This may last a long time. Decide how you're going to manage remotely. Successful remote work is about relationships and communication. Balance the important eye-to-eye check-ins with short video meetings, leverage asynchronous tools, and default to open and transparent, but limit those long, tedious, terrible email chains. Thank you.
Awesome, Marcy. That was so fantastic. I was taking down my own notes, and just so everyone knows, we're going to be sharing this deck afterwards. A couple of things I wanted to make sure that just got double emphasized is, again, that empathetic leadership, making sure that you're taking the time to build a relationship with your intern. And just like Marcy said, one of the most valuable things about an internship is really just being in that environment. So we often hear from our own interns that just sitting in the office and hearing the conversations helps them learn, helps prompt questions to ask, helps them explore what they like, what they need to dig in further. One of the ways you can do that remote, and my team does this, is we both just throw up Teams or Zoom and just work and kind of talk to each other while we work. And sometimes that means there's like 20, 30 minutes of silence. And sometimes it means it's just like ongoing chit chat, like how you would have in the office. So just a couple of ways you can do that. Next, we are going to be hearing all about, I think it's the 3 C's of communication. Correct me if I'm wrong. Bradley?
I believe it's Ann Meeker with hard skills and remote tools.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm out of order. And
That's
so
all
now
right.
we're going to be shifting into our hard skills. So if you could take over from here.
Absolutely. This is part of Zoom life, and I appreciate everyone being flexible. But thank you, Audrey, so much for that kind introduction, and thank you to College for Congress for hosting us today. So a note on my background and how I got here. Until January of this year, I was Director of Constituent Services for Congressman Seth Moulton in the Massachusetts 6th District. I also started as an intern and worked my way up there. So very sympathetic to interns and intern coordinators, intern trainers. I took over our office's intern training about a year before I left that office. So today what I want to do is get a little bit in the weeds about some of the remote friendly practices that we adopted for training our interns. So this is definitely a case study. This is certainly not anything resembling the be all and the end all of intern training, but I hope some of what worked for us will be helpful to you. So I've broken it down here today into the 4 things that really helped for us. Next slide, please. So the first and the biggest thing for us was understanding our own processes and getting everybody on the same page for the expectations for our interns. I think especially as we're all trying to figure out what does a remote internship look like, this has never been more important. So I believe really strongly that intern training can and should be a team effort. This does not just have to be on your shoulders as the intern coordinator. So the first thing we did was we started by crowdsourcing a list of the hard skills and the expectations for our interns from every person in our office. So having that list helped us build a manual that we could then use, I think like Marcy mentioned a little bit, as an asynchronous training tool. So step 1 for our intern training was always to sit our intern down in the corner of the office with a printed copy of the manual and say, I will be back in 3 hours, there's going to be a quiz. Obviously that's a little bit different when you don't have a quiet corner of the office. But I think that's still just setting the expectation that we expect you to take this seriously. This is, you have a stake in your own training. And part of how we reinforced that was telling them there's going to be a quiz later. So not that we actually wanted to test their knowledge or scare anybody, but we did want them to read carefully and take it seriously. And that was a helpful way to signal that. It was also kind of the first hurdle that they had to pass to be a fully fledged intern. And there was a little bit of pride, a little bit of confidence, a little bit of confidence when folks aced that quiz and we were like, great, you can move on to the next stage of our intern training. Can we go to the next slide, please? So step 2, thinking about how, so again, I took on the intern training and I already had a more than full-time job. So one thing I really wanted to prioritize, and Audrey just touched on this beautifully, was how could I layer the intern training into the work that I was already doing? So we found that shadowing was hugely important, not just for demonstrating how our manual actually worked in action, but also for learning some of those soft skills and some of those expectations. So if our intern was going to be constituent facing, we had them shadow a constituent services staffer, usually a caseworker, to kind of soak up those soft expectations that we can't codify into the manual that you have to learn through experience. So what does professionalism sound like? What does empathy look like in interacting with a constituent? And again, this should be a team effort, and this is absolutely possible on Zoom, like Audrey was saying. So rotating around who gets shadowed is a hugely helpful thing, not only for showing interns kind of different approaches to that constituent facing work, but also building those kind of soft interactions and those relationships between the interns and different members of staff. So that was something that was hugely helpful. Next slide, please. So if we were trying to kind of take off as much of the intern training as we could from the intern coordinator's plate, we tried to think really smartly about how could we prioritize, how could we really get the most out of the time that we had to train our interns. So step 3, bless their hearts, our interns were almost always really young and terrified of the phones. This was just a constant for every class of interns I trained. So this is the area where we were starting from the lowest confidence and we needed the highest level of confidence and competence. So this is where we invested our time. And we tried to build their skills and their confidence in a controlled, supportive environment before we threw them into just answering the phones, just answering voicemails. And I know this is a little bit different now with remote life, but I think this is applicable to interns that aren't going to have a major phone role as well. If you have an intern that's primarily handling mail or scheduling requests, the same kind of approach of running through scenarios and running through these kind of role plays, I think is still a really smart way to actually get the intern, start the intern off easy and then push them into the deep end slowly. So we had our 3 tiers. The first one was standard scenarios, where we'd walk through a hypothetical, a very straightforward scenario for an intern to handle. Second one, we got a little harder. We made it a little realer, so the intern would answer a cell phone call from the intern coordinator. So for step 3, we tried to make it realer and then really kind of test them in a situation that might be trying. So again, we used to this was part of our team effort. We brought other members of staff on to play the constituents. And I will say everyone loved the chance to blow off some steam by playing the problem constituent. People would line up to get to be the angry constituent for the intern training. So good way to just whole staff bonding. It was a great time and I really recommend that. But then step 4, if we could go to the next slide, please. Making it feel real. So going, steps 1 through 3, we tried to make it fun. We tried to make it a game as much as we could, but for actually kind of graduating the intern into being a full member of the office, we really wanted to raise the stakes and make it real. So the last step that I always did was sitting each intern down for the catastrophe talk, or the Anne's disaster talk, as the interns called it. But this was where we really went through the high stakes steps and the high stakes processes. We went through the safety training for the office. We went through the threat training for the office, and we went through the constituent mental health training. So folks that were calling in need of medical attention. And again, we didn't hold this to the end to scare any interns, to make it seem like, they were stepping into a role where they weren't going to be supported. But we found it helped to save this for the end, just as that last final, like making it real. These are the stakes. This is what you're going to deal with. The role that you're taking on is real. And this means a lot to people. So the last part of making it real, and I think this goes back to a lot of what Marcy is saying and is really applicable in the remote world. We had a little graduation ceremony. So we'd always have each member of the team be welcomed by each member of staff, have a little handshake. Obviously, we'd have to figure out something else during COVID, but I think that was really important. That was the moment when it hit them, that you have a huge responsibility, but you also have a team to support you. That if you follow your training, then we have your back no matter what. And that doesn't only go for your internship, but it goes for your career in the future as well. So on that note, I think that is it for me, and I will turn it back over to Audrey. Thank you.
That was so fantastic. Thank you, Anne. I love hearing Anne's perspective because she was just on the hill doing this, and now she's getting to share her expertise with you. One of the things that I thought was so interesting about what you brought up is that you give the worst case scenario on the back end. I know when I was an intern, and for a lot of offices we work with, they tend to lead with the scariest part. And it's sort of this like fear tactic management of like, oh, you can't mess this up. What if a reporter calls, read this article? And I really love how you flip that script. So you start with that confidence building, you start doing the test, and then you show them, and here are the stakes, and here's why this matters. It just installs something differently in someone. It makes sure they're motivated to help the office and stay positive instead of just making sure they don't get in trouble. So that's a very successful way to do that. All right, so now we get to talk about communication, culture, and care. Bradley, you want to join us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Audrey. I am thrilled to be with you again today. Thank you to College to Congress for hosting this. It is extremely valuable, particularly in these crazy, stressful, emotionally fraught times that we are living in. When I was asked to present on this webinar, I was trying to think of a nice quick way that I could summarize my program. And I was inspired to write this segment based on the intern supervisor that I had when I was on Capitol Hill. So I was on the Senate Committee for Energy and Natural Resources. It was an extremely busy time on the committee. An energy bill was on the floor of the Senate. And I just had a fantastic supervisor, and I'm still in touch with her today. She's a mentor of mine. And these are three things that she did particularly well. So I'm going to go to the first one now in the next slide, which is care. And obviously, this is something that's especially important during these times of COVID and a remote environment. You want to make sure that you're conveying sympathy, empathy, compassion for your interns, for the work environment that they're in. And one of the ways that you can do that is to ask if there's anything you can do to make this transition easier for them. So making sure that you're accommodating their needs, based on where they live, their access to internet, the devices that they're using. These are all really important things to take into consideration. It's not particularly helpful to assume that the intern right off the bat knows, Outlook and knows how to log into email and knows, that they should have a professional background or maybe dress a little bit more professionally for a meeting with a client. So these are all things that you should reiterate to them before they start and kind of walk them in slowly to that type of environment. Next, you're going to want to touch base with them outside of the office. And that obviously is tricky during COVID. So what you're going to want to do is maybe want to set them up, encourage them to go out for walks and maybe do a phone call instead of a Zoom because of Zoom fatigue. Maybe if they feel comfortable going to a coffee shop down the street, you do a Zoom call with them there and you're at a coffee shop and you're just chatting about, their professional development, their interests, how you can help them. Changing up scenery really does a lot, as we can all attest, since we're staring at screens all day and wishing we could be outside in the beautiful fall weather. So trying to, incorporate that into how you manage your interns is really important as well. Connecting with them, with current or former interns as a network of support is really important. It's helpful for them to have an outlet while they're working, so that's not just them coming to you, their supervisor, or coming to someone else in your team if you're all really busy. If you have multiple interns working at once, making sure that you're encouraging them to communicate with each other so that they have time to work out problems on their own and with each other. You can also connect them with former interns. That's something that's really helpful as well, because chatting with someone who, is still at their level but has done what they've done can be really helpful for them. And lastly, on this slide, you want to be as accessible as possible. We're all very stressed out right now, and sometimes it's a little bit easier to get frustrated or to snap. Making sure that you're being respectful, that you're taking the time. If you get an email that comes across, as Marcy said, you can kind of read it two different ways, or in your response, you're looking at your response to the intern and you're thinking, this could come off as a little harsh or a little quick or curt. Make sure that you're encouraging accessibility and that you're making sure that they know they can come to you even during a busy time. And, it's just as simple as saying, hey, I'm going to help you with this as soon as I can. I'm crashing on this. Can we chat in 20 minutes? Rather than saying, hey, I can't right now, reach out to somebody else. It's the little things like that that make a difference when it comes to empathy. On the next slide, we are going to talk just a little bit about culture. This is something that's really important when you're on the Hill. Obviously, getting to attend event lectures off the Hill or lunchtime lectures, office social hours, Friday happy hours. Make sure that your office is still doing that and you're still incorporating interns in that. At CMF, we have a social hour every Friday at 1 p.m. that we make sure our interns are brought onto. You're going to want to invite interns to the email distribution list as well. So if your intern is working on a particular issue area or a particular something like, for instance, modernizing Congress, we saw with the select committee, making sure that they're on an email distribution list related to that topic so that they're up to speed on what's going on. And they feel a part of the team that way too. You're going to want to encourage your interns to also attend virtual DC events. This is something that I'm so big on because when I first interned in DC, I loved going to Brookings and BPC and all the different think tanks that, had events, and most of them are doing virtual events right now. So if your intern has a particular policy area or something that they're passionate about, and maybe it's outside of your wheelhouse, encourage them to sign up for a BPC, lecture or a Cato lecture or whatever it is. And lastly, on this slide, you want to make sure that you're arranging remote networking opportunities based on interns' career interests. So obviously, we all know networking is key in DC, making sure that you are facilitating those opportunities for your interns, even though they're not physically close to you. So if you know someone who works in healthcare policy really well, or your healthcare LA, hasn't had a chance to work with the intern that much, and your intern's really passionate about healthcare policy, make sure that they get a chance to connect, that they have a half an hour just to chat about what the intern can do to wind up in DC and, work in healthcare or another industry, whatever it is that they end up chatting about. And finally, on my second last slide here on communication, I'm just going to go through this a little bit quickly because I know my fellow panelist, Melissa, is going to chat about this after my segment, but conducting virtual weekly one-on-one meetings is so important. It's the one takeaway that I think every office should get from my segment. Weekly one-on-ones are so important. It gives you a chance to connect with the intern on a one-on-one level. You get to know them personally, what they're interested in, what they're struggling with, where they see themselves going forward. They're absolutely invaluable to your intern success. So I would wholeheartedly recommend them. Second, you're going to want to keep it simple when you're communicating with interns. Just make sure that they know what software your office uses and how you use it. So are they using Slack for a request? Are they using email for a simple request? Just laying that out and make sure they know, okay, if I just need to know where something is on the drive, I can ask someone on Slack. But if I have a bigger request of someone, that's probably going to go through email. Those kinds of things come intuitively to us, but it might be a little bit more challenging for an intern to get overloaded with all of these communication methods. So just be sure that you're specific and clear with them on how they should be asking questions and making changes to documents. And lastly, for this slide, you're going to want to establish clear protocols for questions that arise. So same type of situation. Make sure that you're offering clarity on deadlines. The 1050 rule is a rule that CMF came up with that we're very passionate about, which is checking in with your intern 10% of the way in a project and then 50% of the way in a project. And that way, if they do something wrong or if they make a mistake, you can catch it up front, make sure they understand how you want it done, and then give you a finished product that's exactly what you want, rather than them just going all the way and bringing it to you and you thinking in your head, oh, this isn't what I wanted. Touching base with them is extremely, extremely important. And so lastly, there's just some links here that I'm happy to send out, or College to Congress will be happy to send out at the end of this panel, some CMF resources. And the first one is our most recent one, which is Maya, our remote intern from this past summer, who's pictured below. She was amazing. She did such a great job as our first remote intern, and she wrote a blog post about her experience called Lessons Learned as a Remote Intern. And I think it would be really helpful either for you as managers to see what her experience was like, or to send to your interns just so they get ideas of what they can do or should do as a remote intern. So thank you for taking the time. I'm going to pass it back now to Audrey.
Awesome. Bradley, that was fantastic. The overwhelming message I kept hearing is just communicate, communicate, communicate. Make sure you're caring when you do that. Make sure you're setting up these check-ins and that you're sticking with them too. I know how tough it is to manage teams, and sometimes when someone gets onboarded, you're really good the first, 4 to 6 weeks, and then it kind of dies down. And so Bradley just told you what to do and why, but Melissa Dargan here is going to tell you exactly how to do that. And Melissa is just so fantastic. She's joining us from TourTrackr, but she also has her MBA from the Yale Management School. So she knows a thing or two about management. I'd encourage you to take out your notebook. And just like we keep sharing, we are going to be sharing this deck and all the links and resources after. So Melissa, take it away.
Thanks so much, Audrey, and the College to Congress team for hosting this event. Thank you to all the staffers who are taking your time this late afternoon to join us to improve the way and learn more about how to manage remote interns, especially as someone who used to be an intern, worked my way up, staff assistant, LC, LA. I truly do understand what it is to be an intern, and I bet you most of you guys on this webinar right now had also started off as an intern. And so it's very relevant in terms of figuring out how to do this remotely, especially now during COVID. I'm going to go ahead and dig a little deeper and build on what Bradley had mentioned in terms of your role as a manager. You're not just the, intern coordinator, you're a manager. You're managing anywhere up to 1 to potentially 5. And I know for some committees, at some point it was 12 interns. And what that means is you want to be able to be their guide. You wear 2 different hats. The first one I'm going to cover right now is, while you are their boss, you're still also their guide to help them navigate through, learn about what it's like to work on Capitol Hill. And then the second part I'm going to share with you is your other hat is to help be their mentor. And so as their guide, the biggest thing that you want to start to do is to build trust. And that way you can, rejuvenate energy, because let's be real, working from home isn't as exciting as working on Capitol Hill. And so for interns who may have never stepped onto the Capitol grounds, really getting them inspired and energized and to continue to do work is really important. You also want to be able to, as a guide, facilitate open collaboration, because that's how you're going to get open discussions to really know, one, how the intern is feeling, how you're doing as well in terms of feedback as an intern coordinator, and how you can better work together to get all the tasks that you need them to get done. One thing that Bradley had mentioned was the one-on-one. And I'm going to dig a little deeper into that, into how to have a productive one-on-one. So one-on-one, as many of you guys know, and you guys probably have it with your superior, is a one-on-one meeting where it's just you and the intern being able to discuss at least once a week, and it could be once every 2 weeks, but at least once a week, being able to just touch in. It could be, at minimum, you'd want to do it for 30 minutes. And the reason why you want to do this is because you want to give enough time to just have some conversation, have flexibility in that, and you don't want to be rushing, because then it seems that you're just trying to do a checkbox with the intern versus actually learning about what their interest is. You want to make sure this is consistent. So if you set it at 9 a.m. on a Monday, you always have it at 9 a.m. on a Monday. I mean, obviously on a Monday, people probably try and roll in a little bit later or want to get their coffee break. So maybe you do it midday on Tuesday, but whatever you decide, please stick to it, because by ensuring the consistency, you ensure that you're showing to the intern that you're dedicated to ensuring that you're able to oversee and provide them the attention that they need, especially now when they feel disconnected. You canceling and a constant cancel sends the wrong message. When you do go into a one-on-one, either have you or the intern just outline a couple bullet points of what it is you guys want to talk about. That way you don't come to the meeting and just sort of sit there. Maybe you drive the conversation, maybe they do. If there's just a couple bullet points of things that you need to check in with, and then also get them to converse about, that makes it easier. And then it also structures the conversation so that you probably don't turn a 30-minute convo into an hour. Another thing you want to start off with, because again, a one-on-one, you don't want the intern to feel like it's a check review, that like they're going to be judged when you have this open conversation. Start off with a win, start off with, maybe sending a piece of like gratitude, like thanks for doing X this week. It really helped our office result Y. And that way you just start off on a positive note. And then the main thing I want to say with a one-on-one, in addition to needs to be consistent, is do you want to listen? And I know that sounds basic, but as staffers, you know that you're always possibly looking at your cell phone and checking it. You're maybe looking at the next email or looking for a call from your boss. When you're talking to the intern, if it's a Zoom call or if it's a phone call, really do work on just zoning in on that call just for that 30 minutes. Because again, you may or may not be in contact with the intern in a call or face-to-face, in person, virtually. And you really want to dedicate your time to show to the intern that you are interested in talking to them, learning what's going on, and then also communicating what you need them to do. The other portion about being a manager is to serve as their mentor, sort of like their Yoda and their advocate, especially now during COVID. and there's no receptions, they aren't networking, like they aren't able to do what we all used to be able to do prior to COVID, which was build your capacity and network and people who can advocate for you if you're looking for a job. You are that, and your office is that. And so you really want to work on helping provide more empowerment to the intern. And what I mean by that is when you're looking at the tasks that and responsibilities that you're providing to them to do for the week, you also want to empower them to suggest to you and propose, hey, I want to go to this, virtual event. So while Bradley had mentioned it's great for them to attend these, maybe you just send them that information and you give them a list, like a whole week. You don't have to tell them, hey, you must go to X or Y, or you don't have to manage their schedule. But maybe you just forward them one of the emails with all of the virtual events that are going on. And one thing I do want to plug is in the chat, there is a virtual, like, remote intern newsletter that goes out that curates a number of these events. So if you don't want to curate that, forward this newsletter or tell them to sign up, because it's an easy way for them to stay plugged in. Another thing I want to say is sometimes there'll be issues. They'll approach you with problems. Let them work through solutions. So instead of you solving it or telling them what the answer is, have a conversation with them and be like, well, what would you do in this instance? And then your role isn't necessarily to like provide them the answer straightforward. If they don't get there, help nudge them, right? Like as a mentor, try and steer them in the right direction, but don't just give them the answer forthright. You want them to work through some of these problems, because that enables them to develop critical skills in which they aren't just always bringing a problem to you or eventually their boss. They're bringing also solutions to solve that problem. And then lastly, the biggest thing about this, and during the one-on-ones, this helps structure it, learn what their interests are and what their goals are, and then also shape what the expectations will be of this internship. For instance, if the intern is really interested in comms, I mean, obviously they're still going to help answer phones and they're still going to do a number of the administrative work that you need them to do. But once they're done with that, if they're efficient and effective and they're great rockstar interns, they're going to have extra time. You want to be able to assign them or suggest to them responsibilities and tasks that are in their interest or strength wheelhouse. So for someone that's interested in comms, maybe once they're done with all of their administrative work and answering phones and there's a lull, have them draft an op-ed for your boss and really test them out. Maybe they're a great writer, and then you can be able to edit it, work with the press secretary or the comms director to make this a piece that your boss works on. Again, you do want to note, does this intern have the skill set? Are they interested in it? Is this a strength? And then build on that. But if they prove to you that they are capable and willing and have the time and are interested and hungry to do it, assign it to them. If anything, it helps make a draft, give it to the press secretary or comms director, and it gives the intern substantial work that at the end of their internship is a tangible bullet item, like help draft op-ed for Senator so-and-so. So really figuring out what they're interested in, setting those expectations, I think is really important. And remember, an intern isn't an intern forever. As Audrey had mentioned this, right? Like they are going to be the future pipeline for staff. And as Speaker Pelosi used to be an intern, could you just imagine what being her intern coordinator would have been like, right? Because eventually, years down the road, she's now the Speaker of the House. And so something I wanted to say personally, as someone who used to be an intern coordinator, I found it very rewarding when I was able to help get interns who were capable, responsible, efficient, jobs on the Hill. Because a couple years down the road after I had left to go to business school, I found out one of my interns became chief of staff to a New Mexico member. And that was just one of the things where it was like, cool, I helped him get that job. I trained him well. It speaks to you and your ability as a manager if you can produce very successful individuals around the Hill. And if anything, we all know on the Hill, right? Networking is important. If your interns are successful going off to different offices or, you know, the revolving door of going out into the administration or lobbying on K Street, you only build your network from there. So not only does it help your intern by you serving as a good guide, it's also going to benefit you in helping spread, you know, your network outreach. And so I will leave you with that. Something as simple as like being an intern coordinator is actually more important. You are a manager first and foremost. From one-on-ones to promoting your intern and being an advocate, it's very important to continue to focus on that, especially during this time of COVID.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. That was so helpful. I know I even gained insight. I'll be sharing that with our offices as we continue to have coaching conversations. I want to be cautious of the time. We got a couple questions, but we only have time for one. But I think I'm trying to pick the one that I think will be best for everyone. So the question was, what are some good examples of great research projects for your interns? I love that question because in our intern bill of rights, we require our partner offices to make sure the intern walks away with something tangible that they can put in a portfolio. Bradley, I know you helped work on the remote work from home guide, and there were a lot of good examples in there. Brad or Ann, would you guys like to take that?
Sure, I can start, and then Ann, if you wanna continue on to what I say. I actually have a list here that my colleague George Hajiski came up with, and we're happy to pass that on to offices and post it as a blog post on CMF's website. So I know when I was an intern, I drafted social media posts for the committee Twitter account, attended hearings for staff, taking notes on those hearings so they can be passed on to other staffers later, drafting constituent correspondence responses, either in hard copy form or electronic formats, observing and summarizing virtual seminars and briefings. So as Melissa said in her piece, if you do assign someone to attend something off the Hill that is relevant to their policy area or their office, making sure that they take notes on that and that they compile them. I mean, this stuff is so important because it teaches them how to summarize, which is, you know, obviously a key skill we all need. And also it teaches them how to write professionally and write well. And that's obviously such an important skill. You could also have them create the intern office's handbook. And I think Ann could actually talk a little bit better on that than I could. So I'm going to pass it off to her on that part.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Fred. So yeah, just to double click on that, that was absolutely something I love to do, was get our current interns or our former interns involved in the training process for the next class. So something I always did at the end of an intern season was ask folks, how can we make the intern handbook better? How can we make the intern training process better? Just what do you wish you had known? I also, so again, I'm coming at this from a district perspective, that I worked on casework and I had interns working with me on casework. So I think thinking of giving interns something just tangible that they can take away, I loved to work with an intern, you know, if they were working with me on a particular type of case, to kind of show them how far you could take a specific case. So let's say they worked with me to draft an agency inquiry letter on a windfall elimination provision case. So then working to come up with a brief on windfall elimination provision and what it was, working to develop constituent facing like educational materials on how to handle windfall elimination provision, how to look up some bills that we could have the congressman co-sponsor that would, you know, that would repeal it, and then work on drafting some piece of communication that was going to help spread the word about WEP and what you could do with it. So I think there's a lot you can do from kind of taking specific constituent examples and just throwing it to the intern, being like, how far would you push this? Where do you want to take it? Where are your interests aligned with the tasks that we're going to pull from this particular case? There's a lot of scope to have fun there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. So with that, we are going to be closing out for the day. As I mentioned, we're going to be sending you an email with the links that we mentioned, the work from home guide. Sign up so you can work with us and mentor. You just got a deep dive masterclass into empathetic leadership, hard skill building, how to know how to use these remote tools. The 3 C's, don't forget them: communication, culture, and care. And again, Melissa's awesome teaching on how to be a good manager, and really how to make sure that that shines throughout your office. So with that, we're signing off. Thank you for taking the time to invest in yourself and invest in your interns. We all know that internships change lives. So thank you for what you're doing, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.